Hello, everybody. I am so excited to sit down here today with my friend, mentor, and LP, Kathryn Finney. So let's all give her a round of applause. All right, so I'm going to read Kathryn's bio, and then we're going to get into some questions specifically for her. I want to also welcome all of you guys to submit your Q&A. So you can do that by going into the app, in the South by Southwest app, hitting this session, and then hitting engage, where you can then submit questions to us live, and then we'll be able to circle back to those kind of throughout the conversation, as well as at the end.
You can ask me anything. Anything.
Okay, so Kathryn Finney is a serial entrepreneur and investor. She is the founder and managing general partner of Genius Guild, a Chicago-based venture fund that invests in scalable businesses led by Black founders using innovation to build and promote healthy communities. A Yale-trained epidemiologist. Can we just give a round of applause for that?
My mom thanks you.
Kathryn founded Digital Undivided after selling her media company, The Budget Fashionista, making her one of the first Black women to successfully exit a startup. Her book, Build the Damn Thing, which I have here with me today, her book, Build the Damn Thing, How to Start a Successful Business If You're Not a Rich White Guy, launched in June of 2022 and made the Wall Street Journal bestsellers list in the first week of release. So, you have a podcast, you have a book, and in both of these you talk about your journey. And so, wondering if you can just kind of start by telling us a little bit more about how you got to where you are today.
Oh gosh, well, welcome to South by Southwest, everyone. Today is the first day, so glad to see you all here, and thank you for joining us in one of the early sessions. How did I get here? That is like such a loaded question. And I often start with like growing up. I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My father worked for a brewery. He worked for Schlitz Brewery. How many of you know Schlitz Brewery? Have heard of it, right? It's like very hipster cool now. And you know, we lived in this very blue collar community where you didn't have to go to high school, you didn't have to go to college to live a really great life. And it was actually a very racially diverse community too. That's one of the things that people don't often talk about when they talk about industrial towns. And so I grew up in this racially diverse, very blue collar but middle class community until the brewery shut down. And the brewery shut down quick. It was actually one of the fastest exoduses of a company from a city in like the history of the US economy. It was like in less than a week, Schlitz was there and then it wasn't. And it devastated the city of Milwaukee, devastated my family. But my dad had this like vision for himself. He didn't graduate from high school until he was 30. He graduated at the top of his class, which I think is like amazing with 2 kids. I have 1 kid, I can't even imagine doing it with 2 kids. And he found himself at this workforce development center called OIC that was located like right in the hood of Milwaukee. And the gentleman from IBM decided that he was going to come to the hood of Milwaukee, Wisconsin and teach a group of displaced factory workers how to code. This was in '81. And so he came and taught a C++ course. It was a 6-week Saturday course, foundational computing language, and my dad fell in love. He had this like aptitude for coding and programming. And this is before, you know, everyone was talking about programming is cool. You know, this is like 20 years before the big push to programming. But he had this vision and took this course. He did so well, the gentleman offered him an internship at 36, unpaid, at IBM. And then from there, he got this entry-level job in Minneapolis, which then moved my family to Minneapolis, and then became an executive at Microsoft. And then when he passed away, he was an executive at EMC, one of the early data storage computing companies. So I'm a child seeing this happen, like seeing the power of technology to completely change my family's life. And it didn't just impact me, it impacted friends, it impacted an entire community. And it had a profound impact on me. Of course, I didn't logically go into computing because that would have been too logical, like to go that path. But I went to school initially to become a political scientist, went abroad, got very, very ill, and started to get very interested in health. I had contracted malaria. I was very, very interested in health and the impact of health, and then became an epidemiologist and went to Yale for that. But it was really that early foundation of seeing the power of technology and innovation. Growing up with entrepreneurs, my grandmother was a seamstress and she had her own company, and just kind of being around her and seeing her like work books and seeing her negotiate, getting fabric at a discount and all those sort of things had a massive impact on me.
And so you're currently the general partner of a VC firm called Genius Guild. And previous to that, you founded Digital Undivided. Before that, you were, started a company called the Budget Fashionista, and before that, you were an epidemiologist. So can you talk a little bit about the transition from scientist to lifestyle blog to enterprise to VC, and then kind of what motivated you to make those industry jumps?
Yeah, it made no sense at the beginning. I'll just tell you that. I was working as an epidemiologist, living abroad, when my father became very, very ill. And if you've ever had a sick family member or parent, it's really difficult to be far away when they're sick. And this was in like 2000, so there was no Zoom, there was no FaceTime. It was just no way to stay in contact. You literally just had to physically leave. And so I left my job and came home and took care of my father for a while, and then decided, I'm going to medical school. That was like my idea. So I moved to Philadelphia and took a post-bac program, and then was working as well for a organization called the Philadelphia Black Women's Health Project. In the midst of all of that, dedicating my life to science, that's what I was gonna do, I fell in love. And that kind of derailed things a little bit. It's hard to be in a relationship traveling 3 weeks out of the month. And so got married, and my father passed away. And so I was at this really inflection point in your life. And I think we've all kind of experienced these sort of inflection points where you can choose a couple of different directions, and it's very hard sometimes to choose. That was me at age 25. Do I continue on being an epidemiologist? Do I continue on traveling abroad? Do I stay local? Do I do something completely different? And in the middle of figuring all that out, I was also shopping a lot. And that was my pastime. It was, I love fashion. And my husband at the time was like, look, we're trying to build this life. We can't, you're fabulous, but we cannot build a home on shoes alone. So maybe you should think about how to reel that in. And I know that's part of your creative outlet, so why don't you start something called a blog? And this was in 2002. And I was like, what the hell is a blog? And he was like, oh, it's this thing where people kind of write about what they're doing. At the time, it was mostly just, tech bros. My ex-husband is a tech bro, writing about coding and UX and all this other stuff, right? And I was like, okay, sure. So I started writing about going to sample cells and shopping. And it was so long ago that we used a platform called Gray Matter. Gray Matter was the precursor to WordPress. And in fact, if you speak or ever heard Matt Mullenweg, who's the founder of Automatic, who's the founder and creator of WordPress, talk about it, he will tell you that Gray Matter was this platform that really influenced WordPress, and it came out of Texas. I believe the gentleman who created it, Noah Gray, actually lived in Houston. So the guy who started all of the sort of online content management systems, the father of it, came from Texas. And so I had to learn how to code. I had to go through a process to get the photo of the shoes I took, the shoes that I bought at Nordstrom's Rack for $13 to show up. I had to take a picture, sneak in after hours to my ex-husband's office, scan it. I don't know if you remember the time where we had to scan pictures. and then code it into a MySQL database that I have to create, and then had to learn a little PHP to connect the database to the front end, and had to do a little bit of HTML in order for, so all of this coding for the shoes I bought for $13 at Nordstrom's Rack to show up. And so I started it, and it was just really a hobby. My mom and my sister-in-law were the only two people who were reading it. But what we did was, there was a relatively new search engine called Google. And Google at that time, again, not many people knew about search engine optimization. This is, again, 2002. And so we were putting the posts with like quite a bit of like keywords in it. And as a result, if you Googled sample sales, budget shopping, any of that, we were the first things that came up in Google. And so a writer from the Associated Press was writing about people who travel for sample sales and used Google, and we came up first and interviewed me. And I didn't think anything of it, because it was like, oh, okay, great, I'm in this article. At that time, there was a little investment in the early stages of online content in online content. So most of your major publications were not spending money on the development of content. And as a result, 10 or 15 years later, you saw how they were really vastly behind and had to do a lot of catch up in order to get their systems in line, because they didn't put any investment in the early days. So, make a long story short, this article goes out January 1st, 2004. And it literally was like the commercial where you see like one person comes to your site, then 100, then 1,000, and then like 1,000,000, and it kept shutting down, because this was before cloud. So we were like having to build servers. We spent a lot of money with Rackspace. Anybody here from Rackspace? You owe me dinner. We spent a lot of money with Rackspace, but it was like all of a sudden it became this sort of thing. But I still didn't see it as a business, because there was very few women online, and people did not think at the time, and I remember being told this, that women, they didn't really think that women were going to be good consumers online. I'm serious. Like, this is some of the things that people said to my face now. It's like so ridiculous. So I didn't see it as a business until I got my first book deal. And then I was like, oh shit, someone's gonna pay me to like write about shopping, and I can get, oh, okay, let's do this. Okay, how do you write a book? And so I wrote my first book, and then that kind of led to like a bunch of other stuff.
Okay, and so we're gonna get to the fund, we're gonna get to the book, but first I wanna take a little bit of a pit stop at Digital Undivided. Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about Digital Undivided. What was that? What was your vision for that? And then I also want you to touch on Project Diane, because that's had such great ramifications for diverse founders in the tech industry. And so would love to learn a little bit more about kind of what you saw going into that research and the impact that it's created in the industry.
Yeah, well, while doing the Budget Fashionista, I entered into one of the early tech incubators in New York. This incubator is still kind of around, and was met with the first time in my life where people didn't have low expectations, they had no expectations of me. And being a lifelong overachiever, that was very difficult to be in a situation where people just didn't think I could do it because of my gender and because of my race. Just period. Didn't even like give me a chance to prove it wrong. It was just like, we just know you can't do it. And that just really, really stuck with me. I remember pitching my idea at the time, this is 2009. It was a beauty box company focused on Black women's hair. Now, subsequently, there's been some major exits in the ethnic hair care space. Shea Moisture sold for almost $2 billion to Procter & Gamble. We have Malid that just like sold, I mean, massive unicorn exits. But at that time, it was, you know what, we don't think this is really a business. We don't think this is really serious. And I remember getting up and doing my pitch, and instead of being asked about, my market, what's my business model, how am I going to scale this, how I'm going to develop the product, I wasn't asked any business questions. It was one person stood up and said, I don't think you can relate to other Black women. He was a white guy. And it's like, well, do tell. I mean, maybe he grew up in Harlem or the south side of Chicago. I don't know. And he said, because you have an accountant. And I don't think a lot of black women have accountants. And it was like, and he said this in a room, I'm on stage, the only person of color besides my ex-husband in the entire room in front of 150 VCs and other folks in tech. And it's like, how do I respond to that? Because if I go off and it's like, she's an angry black woman, but then I also don't want to let him get away with it. It was just so hard, the amount of mental gymnastics I had to do in like a split second there. But that stuck with me. And I'm like, here I am, this Yale-educated person who's created a successful business and all this, and I'm getting this? Like, what are other people getting? So after I sold Budget Fashionista, I went to work for BlogHer, which is a woman-led organization that represents millions of women content creators, one of the first ones to do so. And while there, had this idea to have a conference for other just black and brown women who were in startups. Like, we would see each other at South by, you know, we kind of wave, but we never had a place where we all gathered. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, okay, like, let's get us all in the room. And we had our first conference in 2014 called Focus 100. And the women who were at that conference and what they've later done is like pretty incredible. I mean, we had everyone from Issa Rae, who had just done Awkward Black Girls, had just came out. Lovieje, who's now a big influencer. We had just so many amazing people. Oh, excuse me. Thank you. I was struggling to hold that in. And we saw that we had something, and so created Digital Undivided. Originally, it was created as a for-profit institution, but at the time, the tech world, the ecosystem, didn't really see women of color as innovators in this space. They saw us as employees, but not innovators and startup leaders. And so we became a social enterprise. And we became it because a friend who is now leads a big foundation said, hey, I see what you're doing. Like, I see what you're doing, I see where you're going. I think it's super, super interesting, and I want you to do this. And the way I can get you the money to even try to do this is by being a social enterprise. And so we said, fine, we'll do it, because the end goal was to get more women who look like myself into the space. So we did it for a couple of years and was really, I mean, major headwinds. Like, you can't even imagine, and if you guys want to know, I can tell you some other stories. But it was just like the craziest things people would say to us. And so I was about ready to give up. But before I was gonna go, I was like, I have to document the crazy shit I'm seeing. I'm an epidemiologist. If I'm gonna leave this, I'm gonna blow shit up before I leave. And I have to document, because I know I'm not crazy. Like, I was being gaslit when I would say, we're not getting funding, period. Women, people of color are not getting funded. And so we did the first Project Diane report, and it really was my swan song. Like, it was really kind of like, I'm gonna leave this, blow shit up, and then walk out the door, and y'all can deal with the mess of it. And the first year, what we found was there was only 88 black women-led startups in 2015, period, in the United States. That black women had received less than 0.006% of all venture capital funding, period. That only 11 black women had, at that time, raised more than $1 million. 11. And so we released it, and it, like, when I say it caused ruckus in the VC world, and I think some people are still really mad at me about it. It's okay, they'll get over it, or not. But it shone this light of, like, it's hard to ignore something once you document it. Like, once you put the numbers out there, once it's documented, it's hard for you to say, well, there's not a problem. Well, no, here's the problem, here's the numbers. And people challenged us. They would, like, say, well, we know many black women-led startups. And we say, awesome, like, send them to us. And what we found was, it was like a counting bias, a collection bias. It was the same people being sent to us over and over again. And as a result, these people were being overcounted, when it was really just the same people. And so from that, we started to develop programming, because people were like, okay, Kathryn, you can't leave now. You blew it up. We're going to need your help putting it back together. And so I'm really proud to say Digital Undivided now operates in like 6 different cities. The budget is 8 figures. It's doing all this amazing stuff. And it's been a real pipeline for women-led startups, particularly Black and Latina women-led startups, into the startup system. And so I'm super proud of where it's gone. But in the beginning, it was, yes, it was real. It was real.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think as an emerging fund manager myself, looking to invest in diverse founders, like we quote Project Diane in all of our pitch decks. And so honestly, we have you to thank for kind of creating this opportunity for us to all flourish and access that data.
Please use it. Those of you who are emerging managers, or even not emerging managers, if you're in a venture fund, you're a partner, a principal analyst, please use that data. That's the reason why it was created. It's for you to be able to use it and then hopefully influence change.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned your grandmother earlier in this conversation, and just knowing you and through the relationship that we've had, I know that she's been a really huge impact on you and where you've taken your career. And so wanting to learn a little bit more about the Dooney Fund as kind of your personal investment journey has evolved. So can you tell us a little bit about why you started the Dooney Fund and some of the impact you've witnessed since its inception?
So it was, if we can remember, March 2020. I don't know if we want to remember March 2020, no. but we were, it was like business was open one day and then business was shut down the next, right? If we remember that. It was like pretty abrupt. Everything stopped. And we had a number of startups that were in our programs at Digital Undivided that were really struggling. And I had approved some money to go out to them, no questions asked, just quick. No layers, you don't have to fill out an application, just, I think it was like $1,000 or $2,000 because people were really panicking. And so it's like, let's get it out quickly. And I saw how powerful that was. And I also saw how being a Black woman in the position to be able to do that for other Black women, a Black woman capital allocator who could allocate capital to other Black women without layers, without you need to be a part of my network. Basically the same things that were done for other communities, I could do for my own. And it was just so powerful to me to be able to do that. And so I was scheduled to go on a cruise with my family. We usually go on a vacation around my birthday in April. It was a cruise to Alaska, leaving from Seattle. If you remember, in March and April of 2020, that was like the epicenter of the pandemic. I don't think that cruise has still left to this day. 3 years later, I think they're still waiting. And I had this money that came back, a refund. And it was like, what am I going to do with it? I was going to go visit my grandmother, who, we call her Dooney. Everyone calls her Dooney. Her name is Kathryn. I'm actually named after her. I did not know that till I was 12. I used to write letters like to Dooney and Papa J, my grandfather, and the postman would be like, here you go, Dooney. Everyone called her Dooney. And I couldn't go see her. I couldn't go see my grandparents. I couldn't see them for almost a year and a half. And so I was really kind of reeling, like, what could I do? Like, I can't see my family. I can't go traveling. But everyone I know is safe and sound, and everyone I know is good. And the only way I know how to deal with when I'm feeling a little depressed or down is to help someone else, to get outside of myself. And so it's like, you know what? I'm going to give this to other Black women who I know are struggling. And they're going to just be little grants, and I'm going to write notes with each of the grants just to let them know that someone understands and sees them. Because at that time, you couldn't get a PPP loan unless you had a private banker. You couldn't get any of the fund. It was just a hot mess, if we remember that time period. Everything was like, everyone's kind of reeling. And so we did it, and it was so powerful. And then we were talking to one of our partners, Pivotal Ventures, about this thing I did, and they were like, we want to help. Like, we want to be a part. And so then they gave some money. And then other friends gave money, and other investors and other partners. And soon, within a 6-week time period, we were able to give out over $150,000 worth of micro grants to over 1,000 Black women entrepreneurs. No questions asked. We made, literally the questions were, do you consider yourself a woman? Do you identify as part of the African diaspora? Do you have a business? Send us your website, Instagram, something so that we can confirm that you actually have a business. And that was it, in your PayPal account. Because we're like in the middle of a pandemic where people are reeling. We're not going to ask you to fill out an application when you're literally just trying to make it the next day. And so it was just so impactful to be able to do that. We've since given out over $250,000 worth of microgrants to Black women entrepreneurs. And we call it the Dooney, named after my grandmother, who's a seamstress. And my grandmother passed away last year. And I remember saying to her, she always had wanted a bigger life for herself, but she was born in 1920s America as a Black woman in Kansas. And so she was really limited, not because of her own imagination, but because of society. And so for her, for me to be able to say, like, there are thousands of people who know your name, like that know you. And yes, maybe you weren't able to reach that because of the limitations of others, but look at what has happened through me. And my grandmother, before she passed, she said, you know, you are living my wildest dreams. She said that to me. And it just, I mean, it took my breath away when she said that. To know that I'm like continuing on that legacy. My grandmother was very generous to people too. And so the Dooney Fund is my primary philanthropy. It means a lot to me wherever I'm at and I meet a Dooney funder. We call them Doonies. Like, it just, you know, I'm just so thankful and grateful that they allowed me to even be a part of their lives and to help in that way, because I've gotten so much more from helping others than anything that they've given me. Like, it's what I've received has been enormous.
So we actually have a question from the audience from Christine Mitchie. And I think building on kind of this idea of philanthropy, she's asking, what's the best way for philanthropists to support entrepreneurs of color? Grants and cash assistance are often called non-dilutive capital. Do you agree?
You know, I think it's a combination. I think, one, there's a tendency, particularly in the investment space, to look at non-dilutive capital as kind of cheating, which is really interesting, because if you know how some folks get funded, it may not read as non-dilutive, but it kind of is. So I think it's both. I think it's making real investments, and also the capital to get to the point. It's almost like capacity building capital, capital that helps build infrastructure, capital that helps build networks. So maybe it's not necessarily writing a $10,000 check, but it's sponsoring folks to come to South by Southwest. And then once they get there, then taking them and making introductions to people and helping expand their network. Is that sort of investment that I find to be the most impactful. Because one of the challenges as an entrepreneur of color often is that we're not a part of the networks that we need to be a part of to be able to go to the next step. And so it might not be a check that's written to our bank, but it's, hey, I'm gonna pay for you to come to South by Southwest, your airfare, your hotel, and I'm gonna take you to all these events with me, and I'm going to introduce you to these people, and I'm gonna say to these people, here's someone you should invest in, or here's someone you should partner with. That's where I've seen the most impactful help.
Okay, so getting into Genius Guild now. So you launched Genius Guild in 2020. Can you tell us a little bit more about the business platform and what you seek to accomplish with it?
Yeah. So I started Genius Guild. It was kind of like around that same time of Dooney Fund. And so after seeing the impact of being a Black woman who could move that capital quickly to my community, it kind of made me want to boss up even more, for lack of a better word. And so I'd always thought about venture. Had started one of the early venture funds for women called the Harriet Fund in 2016, but it was like way too early. It was the impossibility of starting a VC firm in 2016 as a Black woman, but as a Black woman. Who was not inside of Silicon Valley's bro network in any way, shape, or form. It was really difficult. So in 2020, after the Dooney Fund, I started to think of like what was next for me and seeing the power of being able to move capital like that. And then George Floyd happened. I'm from Minneapolis. George Floyd was murdered about 6 blocks away from where I went to elementary school. I knew almost everyone involved. Like, our hairdresser's husband was the chief prosecutor. I mean, it was like, you know, these are people who I know, who are family members. My niece was a really active part and leader in some of the on-the-ground movements there. And was like, you know, how do I combine my ability to allocate capital with investing in my community and making sure that my community is in positions where when things like this cannot happen, that we are able to get the justice that we need. And so really, Genius Guild came out of that. When I left Digital Undivided, one of our partners was like, what are you gonna do next? That was like the big question that everyone was asking. It's like, I wanna take a nap. That's what I would like to do next. They're like, you know, tell us about what you're thinking. So, well, I'm kind of new to this idea of starting this venture fund and this idea of centering a venture fund that's centered on this concept of everyone wins, that it's not extractive, that's focused on core values of being human and who we are, and bringing humanity to an industry that has none, really, or has very little. And like, and I don't know how to do this, I don't know what it looks like, but this is something I feel like I need to try. And so that partner was like, okay, we're gonna give you money to build it, and gave quite a bit of money for me to be able to build Genius Guild. And so that's how it started. It's like, I wanna invest in brilliant Black founders who are domain experts in what they do and who are creating solutions to some of the most pressing problems we have, and are thinking about it in ways that others aren't. So they're taking all this experience that they had working for other people, building things for other people, and then they're applying it in ways that are gonna help our community. And it has been one of the most exciting things I've ever done in my life, is to see some of the solutions that folks are coming up with and then to being able to invest in them.
And so kind of working and knowing you alongside of you building this investment thesis, can you talk a little bit more about the specifics of the thesis, what you're looking for in founders that really fit your vision for who you want to fund and how you want to fund them?
Well, I'm sitting right next to a perfect example of that. Tessa won't say anything, but I'm going to brag on her. Tessa is from Minneapolis. And when I first met her, I was like, oh my God, another Black woman in VC from Minneapolis? Like, let's talk. But you know, she's a Stanford educated, brilliant Black woman, was a track star, like all of this, had started a startup, had worked in venture, and had a different way of thinking about venture and investment, and a different way of like, how do we get capital to communities of color? And so for me, I was like really intrigued. One, her life story, and then two, that she's really rethinking things. And so I'm like, I have to invest in this because that's what I love. It's like people who think differently. And so what we really look for is people who, again, domain expert, meaning you've worked in the industry, you know it, you have experience, you've built things in it before. We look for those who are building scalable businesses. So at the heart of this is a business. This concept of we all win, me as an investor and my limited partners, you as a founder, and also the communities in which you serve, that isn't just lip service. Like we really, and in order to be able to do that, you have to have a scalable business. You have to have a real scalable business in order to do that. So we look for that. We also look for good people. We invest in good people. And that is, I know, contrary to how Silicon Valley mostly works, as we've seen with some investments, some of the people have been invested. They're brilliant, but they're not necessarily good people. We invest in good people. Venture capital is a long game. You know, you're talking, we're going to be in partnership for 5 to 7 years, maybe even longer. I don't want to be in that partnership with an asshole. I don't. Like, because when things get rough, as they are right now, we're all in the middle of the Silicon Valley Bank fiasco, right? I'm going to need to feel like I'm going to go to the mat from you. I want to do that, and I can't do that if I don't like you as a person, if you're not a good person. that I'm just not able to operate in that sort of way. And so that's what we look for. Anyone can pitch us. I encourage you. We have a pitch button. It's really big on our website in the upper right-hand corner. Pitch, pitch, pitch. Do not say no for us. Let us say no, because you don't know what we may be looking for, or you don't know what we may see. But I encourage everyone to pitch us. We have an open pitch form. You do not need an in. You don't need to know someone. You don't have to do anything like that. Go ahead and pitch us. But that's what we look for. We look for people like you, Tessa.
Okay, that's great. So we have an anonymous question from the audience. Yeah. What advice do you have for founders who may be struggling to secure funding or who may feel discouraged by the lack of diversity in the VC industry?
Ooh, that's a good one, and it's a tough one, especially right now. Historically, whenever the markets go down, marginalized communities also go down and bear the brunt of it. And I think we're kind of seeing that a little bit now. When I say marginalized communities, not just Black founders, but also women. And if you have any sort of level of intersectionality, you get a double. The advice I have for founders is to focus on business fundamentals. And this is an advice I've given our founders, period, even before the market downturn, is like the basics of business. Have more money coming in than you have coming out. And I know that's really hard in the tech industry when it's really capital intensive at the beginning, right? To think in that sort of way. But we're at a point in history that you're going to have to start thinking in that sort of way. Because it's going to be very, very hard to raise, especially if you have a new idea and you don't have the existing networks. It's going to be, I'm concerned about what's going to happen as a result of some of the banking things that are happening this week in terms of locking up even more capital and people being a little bit more afraid. So as a founder of color, what you have to do is focus on the business fundamentals, conserve cash, cut out anything that does not contribute to your business. If it does not contribute to your bottom line, nix it. That means transitioning people too, which is really, really hard thing to do. You're not a CEO until you've had to fire someone. That is not fun. I don't care what Donald Trump says. That is not fun, firing and laying off someone if you are a human being. And I talk about that in the book about how to let go of people and how to do it in a humane way. But it's nixing anything that doesn't contribute to business. One of the things for founders of color and also women, and this is just for anybody, regardless of your race or gender, if people want you to come and speak, especially corporations that have done very well, they need to pay for you to come and speak. You can't do it for free anymore. At the very least, your airfare and hotel need to be paid for. And the reason being is because you have to conserve cash. You have to conserve cash, right? So if they want you to be their diversity person, if they want you to be the lone woman on stage, so it's not all, bros or whatever, they need to pay for you to do that. And because you can't afford to do it for free. And so it's things like that, like getting really conservative with cash, really looking at the things that are driving your business and being almost ruthless and cutting out anything that doesn't drive your business, really maintaining relationships and focusing on those, because then you want to be in a position when things improve, and they will improve. You want to be the first person or first company they look at when the money does free up a little bit, because you want to be in that position. So maintaining those relationships, that doesn't cost anything. Sending email updates. If you have taken investment, whether it's angel, venture, what have you, let your investors know what's going on earlier rather than later, sooner rather than later. And the reason being is that oftentimes a lot of us are sitting on dry powder, meaning that we have money that we're not allocating because we're kind of hedging our bets against sort of where the market may go. But we're willing to help those that we've already invested in. And it's easier for me to help you if I know that you're having an issue earlier rather than when it's in crisis mode and you need money like tomorrow. It's much harder for me to be able to help. So if you have received investment or you have core partners, keep talking to them, keep those relationships, let them know where you're at, let them know what your run rate is, let them know if you see any particular challenges coming up. Some challenges we can't predict. We can't predict that our bank is not going to be there the next day. You can't predict. That wasn't one that I think anybody quite saw coming totally, or at least not this quickly. But if you keep in communication with your investors, your partners, it gives them a way to help you, right? It gives them a path to do that.
Okay, so I want to talk about the book now. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then, as I mentioned, you guys can submit your questions. We're going to have about 15 minutes for Q&A. So if you have any questions that you haven't submitted yet, do that on the app. What made you decide to go further? Now you've launched multiple businesses, you have a venture fund, you're investing angel capital, you're an LP, and now you want to write a book. So can you talk a bit about why you decided to make this decision to expose the toxic work culture in Silicon Valley and propose solutions to encourage founders to build the damn thing?
It's the book. I wrote the book that I wanted, that I needed, actually, when I first got started. The startup industry really is an industry based on information and access to information. And I found as a woman, as a Black woman, I just wasn't getting information. No one was telling me anything. No one told me what a cap table was. It was hard to find out even how to find it on my own. No one told me how venture works. No one told me, this is, one of the things, no one told me that VCs are investing in potential. No one told me that. And why that's important is I come from a community where we only get invested in, or we get money as a reward, meaning we get money after we've succeeded, right? Once we've proven ourselves. We rarely get money before we've proven ourselves. That's not something that happens. That level of investment happens at any sort of scale in the Black community. So for me, it was like, I didn't know that what you wanted me to be is more future forward. So I'm being more conservative with my estimates. I'm like, look at how well I can manage capital. Shouldn't I get like a pat on the back for that? And you're actually penalized in venture, although I don't know, coming up again this week or so, those of us who manage pretty well are going to do okay on this, but you're actually penalized for being conservative with your capital, right? You're supposed to spend for growth, you're supposed to grow really fast, all these sort of things. I didn't know that, right? Because again, I came from a community in which we didn't get investment like that. So wanting to write all of that in a book, and then being an investor and seeing how much information we didn't have, and working with founders who were like, well, why didn't anyone tell me that? And like, is that what you wanted? Oh, they could have just told me that. I would have did that. Like, I put it in a book, and it's been amazing just to hear the response to the book. I'm doing a book signing after this, I think on the 3rd floor, so please, like, come down. But it was like, I want to write a book, and then I want to write it in a way that I want to read. So I don't want to read like some fuddy-duddy book that's like, you know, it has like rap quotes. I quote Cardi B in it. I quote BTS, like, you know, but I wanted to read it in a way that I could hear it and that I could understand it myself. Because most of the tech books I've read, and startup books and books on entrepreneurs, were written by like privileged white men who had money or who had networks. And the assumption was that I'm going to have those same networks, or that people are going to respond to me in the same way that they're going to respond to them. Like, I can't ask my family for $50,000. I am the friend and family in my family. If I ask them for $50K, they're going to want it back tomorrow, right? Like, they're going to want it back. They're going to want to know, how are you going to give me this money? And so there was these assumptions in these books that you just had family around who could write, you know, 5-figure checks to you easily and not want the money back for years. I'm like, I don't know anybody like that, you know, that wouldn't want their money back. So what do? Am I not supposed to build a startup? Am I not supposed to innovate? Am I not supposed to create because I don't have those same access to those same sort of networks? So that's really the basis of the book. It's called Build a Damn Thing because it was something that I would say over and over again, because people would come to me in conferences and pitch me their ideas, and I'd be like, okay, so show me a prototype. And they're like, oh, well, it's not yet. I'm waiting to get my pitch deck perfect, or, you know, I don't want to show you because, you know, I don't want you to steal it. And I'm like, just build the damn thing. I mean, build it. What are you waiting for? I can't react to it. I can't even say if I want to invest in something that's like a nebulous idea. I need you to build it so I can see it and I can give you advice, and then I can even consider it for investment. But when it's like up here and it doesn't look like anything and you're kind of holding it close, I can't do anything with that. So build a damn thing.
Okay, so one question about the book for people in the audience who haven't read the book. Give us a little teaser. So what are the 5 bold-faced lies entrepreneurs need to ignore when starting a business?
I think everyone knows these, but I'll give just like a couple. So one is that you have to be a coder, a programmer to start a tech business. We all know that's not true, right? So that's one, that you have to have gone to Stanford, MIT, Harvard, Carnegie Mellon, UC Berkeley in order to be a part of these networks. Originally, venture was started to fund those people, right? Venture was started to fund a very specific group of people in a very specific geographic location in a very specific industry. That is how it started, but that's not true anymore. So I mentioned Matt Mullenweg. He went to University of Houston of WordPress. Jack Dorsey went to the other MIT, the Missouri Institute of Technology. I didn't even know there was a Missouri Institute of Technology. So these people who are really successful, and they didn't go to these sort of Stanfords and stuff like that. They weren't part of these sort of networks. In fact, most of the successful, particularly black founders, went to HBCUs. And the top HBCU being Howard University, where most of the black founders who are successful, who have raised significant amounts of money, have come from. That's not Harvard, MIT, Stanford. And so you don't have to be a part of those sort of networks.
All right, so I'm going to go to some of the questions from the audience. I really like this one from Derek Stevens. Being a serial entrepreneur, a black woman, and a mother, what strategies do you use to deal with the stress of having to run faster, jump higher, et cetera?
Ooh, good one, Derek. I always remember to make time for the people who were there before all of this. I am very big into relationships and loyalty. The people in my life have been there for a long time, even in this space. And so I always make sure I create space for the people who love me and who've been there from the beginning. Don't get so wrapped up in the startup game that you don't create space for the people who love you and who loved you before all of this stuff. Don't lose sight of that. Your friends from college and elementary school, and your family, the people, whoever you consider family. Don't lose sight of that. Don't ignore them in the race for whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. I also do, on a personal, there's a couple of things I do. I'm very into my own spiritual health, and so I'm kind of like turn into like a black church lady a little bit, but church is important to me. It is for my spiritual growth, and not in like a churchy, preachy, sort of way that church has been perverted to limit people, not in that sort of way, but more of a spiritual growth, particularly in the type of church that I go to, which is a African-American church. In the African-American history of church, our church is more about upliftment and about getting through the day and helping you, give you the tools to be able to operate in a world that's very hostile to you. And so I'm already in a world that's hostile to me, in an industry that's very hostile to me, right? So I need all the upliftment that I can possibly get to be able to get through the week. Because even though I've reached a certain level, I still have to deal with crazy shit too. And people saying crazy things to me as well. And the other thing is, I create space for, physical health. So swimming is really important to me. I swim 3 to 4 times a week. I love it because you can't think when you're swimming because you drown. I realize that. When my mind wanders, this, you can't do anaerobic breathing and, overthink. So, the water gets in my nose and it's okay, stop overthinking. But there's something about being in the water. They can't really hear anything. It's really peaceful. It's kind of you get in this rhythm, and I love it. And it's a meditation for me. And I love to do it. And it's one of the things that helps keep me sane. So whatever the physical release or activity you can integrate into your life, do it. I think there's a tendency for us to really get into being over busy, it's a badge of honor. I'm so busy, I can't do this, I'm so busy. I'm why do you want to live a life where you can't take a moment out for yourself? Like, you can't take an hour out of 24 hours a day to do something for yourself. Like, why is that a life you want to live? I don't want to live that sort of life where I can't do that. And I'm a mom. And I have other moms who are like, oh, I can't do it. I'm like, look, I have a closet. I go in my closet when I want to be alone. When my son was younger, he's 7 now, but when he was like 3 or 4, he would like come in and like, Mommy, are you in the closet? Like, Mommy needs 10 minutes. He's like, okay. I was like, come back in 10 minutes. Mommy gets 10 minutes. I get 10 minutes to myself. Then, the rest of the day, I'm all yours. But that 10 minutes, that's mommy minutes. And we actually call it mommy minutes. But you can take time out for yourself just to replenish whatever it is that you do, whatever your spiritual practice is, and I don't mean religious, but is it meditation? Is it a gratitude journal? Is it, talking to a friend? Is it going for a walk? Whatever that is that helps you stay connected and grounded, that becomes really, really important in managing this process, particularly if you are a person of color, you're a mom, you're managing people, you have family obligations. Like, taking that moment to replenish your own soul makes you a better leader. It makes you a better person in general.
Okay, we have a question from Phoebe Glah, and I'm personally actually also going to upvote this one because I think it's something that spending time with you has really shown me a little bit about how to do this, and so I think you're the perfect person to actually answer this question. So, as a young woman in a mostly male-dominated industry, what advice do you have to make your voice heard and advocate for vertical growth?
So, this is a great question. Let people know your wins. Brag on yourself. I mean, you really have to be your own advocate. Don't expect anyone else to be. So that's the first thing. Let people know what you've done. And there's a way to do it that's not like, look at me. But in essence, you are really saying, look at me, right? But it's a way to do it where it's, you can talk about what it is that you do. And as someone said, put a little bass in your voice. Like, when you have these wins, don't be afraid to share it and to share it confidently. Note that some people are not going to be okay with it. And they weren't going to be okay anyway, right? It has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with whatever issue that they're dealing with. But you have to be an advocate for yourself. The other thing is, like, really seek out sponsors and co-conspirators. I have found that to be really, really helpful, to have 1 or 2 people who kind of sponsor you. Not mentors. We've been mentored to death. We don't need any more mentors. What we need is sponsors, like people who will walk us in the room, people who will, when you do advocate for yourself, they'll be that person that sends the follow-up email and says, yes, they did a great job. Did you see this? Sometimes even, here's a trick that my friends and I do sometimes. When we don't want to be the person that brags on ourselves, we'll ask one of our sponsors to brag for us and say, oh, did you see blah, 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 blah in this? If you don't feel comfortable, like, you can have that. You can have other people do that. And you can do that for each other. We sometimes do that, which is really great. And then you can, like, amplify it, like, oh, thank you so much for recognizing me. I so appreciate that, right? Even though in the background you guys conspired to, like, do that. It's totally okay. No one has to know. But you have to advocate for yourself, and you have to let people know your wins, and you can't be afraid to do that. And, of course, there's going to be people who are not going to like it, but then there's also going to be a lot of people who do.
So Michael Stern wants to know, while VC funding is incredibly inequitable, so are other parts of our ecosystem. So how can we tackle these issues in media coverage, in sales, et cetera?
So I think the best way is to not talk about the inequalities, because we've talked about that enough. I've been talking about that for 10 years. I'm just tired of talking about it, to be perfectly honest. What I think is a better thing is to reframe it and talk about the wins. Talk about the opportunities, right? I mentioned Shea Moisture and other Black-led hair care companies that have exited well into the billions, right? Let's talk about those, like that opportunity, right? These companies are consistently being bought in these major buyouts. That's a major investment opportunity, right? So let's talk about other opportunities in our community. We primarily invest in health. there's so many opportunities in health. One of the platforms that we've invested in is called YouMe. It's a pediatric mental health platform. There is a child mental health crisis in the United States right now. That crisis is not just in urban communities, it's also in rural communities as well. And so this platform provides a service to children who are primarily part of Medicaid Advantage, which is a huge market. That's an opportunity, right? Like, let's talk about the opportunity for investments. And that's where I think where the real kind of reframing, because if you focus on the negative, the inequalities, people tend to stick in that, and they get comfortable talking about that, versus like the opportunities for investment in our community, the ideas that are coming out of our community. I always love to talk about the impact of hip hop. Imagine what would have happened if you were investing in the early days of Def Jam, right? Which is where LL Cool J and Run DMC and all these other folks came. Imagine that opportunity, the opportunity that hip hop presented. A whole entire genre of music was created, right? One of the only genres of music that was created solely on American soil, right? Like, imagine that opportunity. Like, and so I'd like to talk about the opportunities in our community and for investment, and opportunities to co-invest with funds like Genius Guild or Capitalize in order to get to these markets and to help these companies reach higher levels. So, yeah.
All right, sounds good. So I'm going to wrap it up with a couple of last questions. You mentioned in your talk about kind of all the different things that you've done in your career that it was tough, and you were like, you know what, I might be ready to stop. And so what were the things that motivated you to keep going? Or how did you find that motivation?
I think, you know, what motivates me is really like investing in people like yourself. There is nothing more gratifying than investing in someone who looks like you and seeing them win. And that makes all the drama worth it. Like, so when I see Tessa win, it really fills my heart as a person. It also, you know, fills my bank account as an investor too, but as a person, to see her win is amazing. We have, you know, companies that have raised price rounds. In this tough market, over 50% of our investments have raised price rounds. All of those investments were led by Black women, right? Like, that sort of, that is what makes it worth it to go through all of the drama, because in the end, it's about investing in people and investing in our community and investing in success. So when you win, that's what gets me excited. That's what makes it worth it.
Okay, and so then a question, you kind of led into this, you know, a lot of the successes in your portfolio right now are Black women. Yeah. I think there are clear themes throughout your career of supporting and advocating for the entrepreneurial ecosystem, particularly communities of color, more specifically Black women. And so as a final question, what is it that you feel that Black women uniquely bring to the table, and how can we continue to tap into this overlooked value?
There's something about people overlooking you and being underestimated. Like, it just allows us to get shit done, because no one's looking at us, and people are constantly underestimating our capabilities. So we're able to, as a friend says, you know, real G's move in silence. We're able to move in silence and get things done because people are not paying attention to us. And then you look up and it's like, well, how did this woman do this? And it's like, I was doing it while you weren't looking. You were over there looking at Adam Newman, and I'm over here building this hair care company or what have you. And, you know, he's losing all your money, and because you didn't invest in me, that means I get all the money, right? And so it's that ability. I think also we, you know, I joke like this to my other VC colleagues, and they have no idea what I'm talking about, but I'm like, Black women can make a single chicken last for a family of 4 for a week. We'll have chicken salad, we'll have chicken sandwiches, we'll have, you know, like all this sort of stuff. We know how to make money last. We are very capital efficient at a time where capital efficiency is really needed. And we're taught that from a very early age, not just Black women, but also my Latina sisters too. We know how to stretch a dollar. We know how to make it work. So as a result, when you have this sort of downtime, we know how to do it. And then we do it with style. I'll leave with this, something my 7-year-old said to me. We were talking about sassiness and who's sassy. And he said, you know, Mommy, you're sassy like Beyonce, but old. And so I say that to say that we do it with incredible style and incredible grace as well.
Well, thank you. Let's all give Kathryn Finney a round of applause. You are amazing.